Hello and welcome. I'm Jade Scott. This is GrowthRx, and today we are joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Nick Papastamatis. How are you, Nick?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me, Jade.
Pleasure. Now you're up there in Brisbane, but you normally make your way around almost. Your clinics are nationally. You're a business owner, a mentor, a GRx leader, a chiropractor. We should throw that in there. I mean, look, your CV is a mile long.
Yeah,
What do you feel like you're most known for in the allied health industry?
that's a good question. I think I'm. Firstly, I don't feel like my CV is as long as I'm in Brisbane right now. My clinics are mainly in Sydney, and I think I'm mainly. Look, I think I'm known for different things in different places. But if you're going to ask me what the chiropractors think I am, I think they think I'm a chiropractor who does a lot of sports-based stuff. And that's what I've done for the majority of my career. I continue to do that. And I just love educating people to inspire them to change. I don't care whether you're a patient, whether you're a practitioner. The idea is that I want to implant something in your head that's a catalyst for your development. That's what I do. And whether you're a patient, that happens with some sort of education. And if you're a practitioner, again, same thing.
Now, obviously I've had a lot of contact with you. I've been blessed to connect with you through GrowthRx over the last 12
Yes,
months. It's been wonderful
has
getting
been
to
nice.
know you and your leadership journey. But you were admittedly a real hit at the Business Growth Summit last year. You were a favorite of the mentors in regards to the feedback, particularly when it came to culture and leadership. And I guess, as you just said, inspiring teams. So that is what you're going to be talking to us about today, culture and values-based teams. But before we deep dive into that, we can let our listeners get to know you a little bit more. You are the owner of Balance Health Performance and also a podcast, The Balance Experience. I've also had the pleasure of meeting and working with some of your team. They are legends. So what a fitting topic for you to be talking about, basically the people that you love, that you get to work with every single day. But I'd love to know more about your leadership journey, because in my discussions with you, it has changed a lot. Am I right in saying that, from when you first started as a business owner, as a boss, as a leader, to where you are now? You've certainly evolved, matured, all those sorts of things. What's been one of your biggest failures?
I stopped listening at some point. That's what happened. I stopped. As a kid, as a 15-year-old, I was already like my first self-help book was when I was at the age of 15. So it was called "You Can Do It" by Paul Hanna, and it was the shittest book I think I've ever read, but it was good. Excuse the French, sorry. But it was good because it got my brain ticking in such a way that got me to realize, oh wow, okay, there's something in my head. I then became the school captain of my college, and then continued on through Cairo. But then something happened to me, and I stopped listening to people around me. And essentially, I became very, very competitive. I realized that the science of that we're in started to trigger areas in my brain which made me feel like I needed to either prove myself, and the discomfort that it put me in probably made me want to satisfy and feed into some of the traumatic events that have occurred in my life, and then basically just turned me into a healthcare addict, i.e., I couldn't stop helping people. And when I couldn't stop helping people, really what that meant was I couldn't stop getting hits of dopamine every time I would crack someone's neck, or that I would treat someone. And along that path, anyone that got in my way was basically ripped to shreds, essentially. And it wasn't until I had to solve the problem of a boss that I wasn't getting along with, and that was the reason why I started my business. I started my business because I had to solve that problem in my life. And I'll tell you what, when I started balancing the performance, I was 20. I was not even 25 yet, and basically I was just treating patients, and that was it. And slowly, if you weren't assisting me in treating patients and actually dealing with the demand and the workload, then I was either getting rid of you, or I was yelling at you, or you were getting the hell out of there anyway. And basically, since then, I nearly lost the business because it grew so fast. And when people, I realized what people mean by don't grow too fast. I figured that out the hard way. And basically, I had to then adapt and then tap into the things that I learned when I was 15 again. Yes, and the qualities that got me to the top of my college, although leading a school of 1,100 students is not exactly the same as business leadership. It's a bit of a falsified microcosm. It kind of like it made me realize that I stopped listening to people along the way because the people that I was listening to weren't helping me. And it wasn't until I realized that no, the people that were trying to tell me stuff I wasn't listening to, they were trying to help me, and I just wasn't open to learning. Yeah. I faced a lot of demons, and eventually realized I needed to get my shit together. And ever since probably 2000, probably for the past 6 years, 5-6 years, I've really tapped into what it means to be a leader, and basically had to re-find myself again.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say, it's really hard looking back on our vulnerabilities, and we often use our ego to protect our identity a lot. And I think you learn that with professional maturity and just connecting with people all the time. One of the things I say a lot is leadership is our most important relationship. It's a relationship between people who aspire to lead and those people who are willing to follow. And without that relationship, you don't have that connection. You can't create meaningful change. And I think from what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that your not only your ability to lead, but your mindset and I guess the way that you navigate people and those relationships has changed a lot over the last 6 years. And I think this is why I love talking to people like yourself about culture, because sometimes it's not all just kumbaya, let's sing around a campfire and rainbows and unicorns. There's a lot of toxic culture out there, and some of that comes from the top down. Sometimes, as I know Brett Weiner says, the fish rots from the head down. Yeah. And sometimes the worst person in business can be the boss or the business owner. So I'm really interested to hear a lot of your learnings and your perspective on this from someone who has probably, and perhaps tell me if I'm wrong, done a full sort of 360 shakeup. You've kind of gone ahead and then you've jumped back with a little bit of resilience back to when you're 15, and you've reshaped the way that you lead. And I think that's what I admire so much about you, is that you're happy to tell this story and you're happy to express to others the lessons you've learned from some of your shortcomings that you've been able to move forward from. So I'm aware that you've put together some slides. I'm grateful for that. Yeah, so I'm going to hand over to you to share a couple of slides. We're going to chat back and forth over the next 45 minutes to an hour, and looking forward to hearing some of the feedback from those listening at home. But I will hand over to you and you can take it away. Culture and values, teams-based values and leadership.
You know what? I often have looked at, or if you were to ask me, what's culture, a little while ago, it would have been hard for me to explain that answer. And you know what? Having done some study now and having learned what I've learned, it's not exactly easier to explain what culture is, but it's kind of like the more you know, the less you know type of situation, kind of like healthcare. You realize how difficult and how in-depth the word culture actually is, without and I suppose where it's interesting is that the people that know the least are the ones that think they understand it the most. And the thing that I hear the most, and I'll tell you what, Jay, it drives me bonkers, in an intriguing way. I get very intrigued when they say, Nick, you guys just have some amazing culture. It's like, yeah, but you don't know what culture is. And I'm trying to sort of say, it in a loving way, of kind of like, well, what are you looking for? And I find it interesting. What are you looking for in the context of what great culture is? What does that mean? Unfortunately, to your point there, Jade, most people do think that it pertains to a lot of fun, laughing, patting each other on the back. You know, you're on mute. Sorry, what'd you say, Jade?
There's lots of weekend retreats and social events and
Yeah, yeah.
parties and scavenger hunts.
I think, Jade, that people want to call out good culture or culture that they like is because they're the things that they really want as part of their culture that they don't have. But really, like culture, and this is Gert Hofstede's definitions. And now Gert Hofstede is, I don't know if I'd call him the forefather, but he's probably the most prolific researcher in culture. And it was pretty recent, in the past 50 years, that he did a worldwide study, a questionnaire study in all of IBM internationally. I think he collected somewhere in the tens of thousands of questionnaires, huge, and basically realized that there were tendencies of different cultural paradigms across the world, which differed depending on which part of the world you were from. So Gert Hofstede's definition is quite well researched, and I'd probably trust that it's pretty robust. And that is, it's the collective programming of the mind that distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from others. I.e., why do we belong together and why do other people not? And essentially, it ties into a concept we call social identity theory of why do I belong into this group versus that group, and why do I have a Samsung and not an Apple, and frankly, why would you? And it's kind of like, and I think Nike versus Adidas, those sorts of things are those sorts of choices that people make say a lot about them, and the people that identify with them say, if you like Samsung, then you must also like PC, and you must also like this and also like that. And with that comes a particular type of culture, attitude, belief, etc., etc. Essentially, tangible, the culture is distinguished by things that are tangible or things that are known. Now, I've purposely sat here because you can see the three colors that resemble my company, Balance Health and Performance, of the red door, the white walls, and the gray wall. Essentially, if you walk into any of my clinics, you'll know that they look the same. And in that room, you get a specific Balance Health and Performance experience. You get the balance experience. And that comes with a whole range of, these are the tangible things. We've got white furniture, like that's all tangible, but then you've also, and even the logo is tangible, but then there are things that are intangible, like the way that the practitioner makes the patient feel. And that feeling being like, whenever you walk out of balance, you get this feeling. And that feeling also happens to the practitioners, the people that work inside the company. They also want to choose your company based on your logo, based on your vision, based on your colors, based on their uniform, based on the working environment, but then also the types of relationships they have, how authentic they're allowed to be. Are they allowed to swear? Are they not allowed to swear? Can they wear earrings? Can they not wear earrings? Like these are the things that are known, unknown, that create a culture. There are intangible things, like unknown things, that are hidden below the surface, like, oh, no, don't say that to Nick, he'll do so and so and so. But that might be known or unknown, right? But it's kind of like no, like that's kind of like a subliminally underneath the surface. You can't see it anywhere on the walls. It's not in your practitioner handbook of like induction manual. Don't tell Nick that he's wrong. You will lose that argument. And although that's partly true, it's also an example of an intangible understanding of what the culture is at a particular place. An intangible understanding of the culture could be that it's quite hierarchical, and that you have to respect the power distance from the top, from the bottom, and versus a collectivist culture, which is a little bit more flat in its structure, and you can be pretty much everyone's on the same level playing field. That has a very, very distinct difference in terms of what's allowed to be said intangibly and unknowingly versus what shouldn't be, etc. Do you want to throw anything in there, Jados?
Well, just unmuting myself. Yeah, look, I'm scribbling away for those, as I do every single week, learning from great people. I think there's a common thread coming through already, which I love, which is my sweet spot, and that is culture attached to emotion and attached to experience. And we're seeing that, as you talk about, through brand, through reputation, how people feel, whether it be staff or patients, from a beginning to an end, and also those intangibles that you talk about, where there's certain behaviors that are unspoken that are just learned just through generational change, through staff turnover, and all those sorts of things. And I guess it kind of really brings the cult to culture. Cult doesn't always need to be bad. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, did you say cults don't necessarily need to be bad?
No.
Yeah, well, I mean, why don't we just use CrossFit as an example? Now, you could look at CrossFit as good or bad, but as far as I'm concerned, I've never seen a greater health and fitness movement in my career, my life. But then the only one that resembles it was probably aerobics back in the 80s, but that only lasted 10 years, and I don't see anyone doing that unless it's a meme. So really, kind of like CrossFit is the biggest cult across in the health and fitness sphere, and I don't call it bad. I mean, you can make it bad by being a little bit diehard crazy and doing your 51st power snatch at 60 when really you should be resting. but that can turn bad, and maybe using a diet that's unhealthy for you. But by and large, a cult like CrossFit, which has a culture, is good.
Well, I had a ex-staff member who referred to Western Region Health as a cult once, and it was one of the greatest compliments I've ever got. I mean, to establish a group of people with the same common values-based passion, mission that are all inspired and share that same purpose is very hard to get, and it doesn't happen by accident.
No.
So, it does take a certain type of person, but it also takes a great leader to inspire a shared vision. And that's one of the 5 principles of leadership, is to be able to do that. And not everyone can do that. Not everybody can take a group of people and move them forward at the same time in the same direction.
Very difficult.
So, yeah, I agree with you.
Even birds don't fly in formation. Like someone's always last, someone's always first, and someone's always off to the side. And that's part of leadership, but also culture, to know that there are people in your company right now that are totally invested, and there are people in the company that have one foot out.
Yeah.
And that's normal. It has to be. Otherwise, it's also unhealthy.
And I'm sure that you're going to go into this, but I would love to hear your thoughts, if you're not going to address it later on, how we deal with those people with one foot out.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to. Do you want me to tell you now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just put a bit of pressure on them.
Okay.
And as soon as you're not sure about someone, then if they're really invested and truly they actually want that, then you start to pressurize either their performance, or you start to ask them questions about what their purpose is and make them have difficult conversations with you. Test their resilience, because the harder they fight to stay, the more they're invested, the more they're there. And that's part of that cognitive dissonance of the harder you work for something, the more you want it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're making it too hard and they already got one foot out, then see you later, mate. And this is why I don't love dismissals, because I think that everyone's on their way. like there should be a time limit to everyone. But people that are on their way out kind of need to sometimes need a push, and that's going to be better for both of you in the long run.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the answer you were hoping for.
Well, no, it's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine, one of my best friends, who's just started at mydeal.com, and they're a great e-commerce industry, and they've just rebranded. And she went in on her first day at work. The CEO came and sat down, and he said something fascinating. And I was like, I love learning from people and how everyone does things differently. And he spoke and he addressed the group, a bit kind of Wolf of Wall Street type thing. You can imagine he sits down in the chair and he said, I am so excited about the future. If you're not, I will pay you to leave right now.
Yeah. Yeah, which is hugely polarizing, especially to a group. My business mentor, he owns a massive international hospitality group, and he had an issue in Dubai, and he literally went over. He had 150 staff. He went over and he knew that there was a mole in that group, and basically he sat them all down, 150 of them, all at the same time. Everyone rocked up to the meeting. He said, "Who's with this bloke?" And then people stood up and said, "Yes." He goes, "You're all fired."
Wow.
Yeah. I was like, holy shit. Yeah, that's one way to do it. But now I don't know, without going into detail, I mean, the context of it was quite severe and quite catastrophic. And if you didn't do that, then potentially it would have ended the business. But hey, that's probably the largest thing. I suppose the other side of the spectrum is do nothing. And then not only will you look weak to the people that are invested in you, because then if you start giving attention to someone who has their one foot out, and you start nurturing that, you can, in that hopeful, that I suppose falsified hopeful sort of mentality that they're going to come over, you're going to win them over. That never ends up happening. And then the rest of the team look at you going, dude, you got to get rid of them. They don't ever say that to you. And then actually you start to lose their respect as well.
And that's the beauty of great leadership, is that you can be adaptable. You know when your leadership needs to be direct, and you also know when you need to participate with the team and be a little bit more engaging. It's about being malleable, and great leadership is about being a chameleon, being able to walk into the room, read the room, and actually deliver information or listen accordingly, whichever one is needed, for the right, fastest, best decision at the right time. So yeah, look, I totally agree. And I think that's the difficulty of knowing when to act, and hoping that it doesn't blow up in your face, or alternatively, if you don't act, it can still equally blow up in your face. Because
I just don't.
What you don't do.
Oh, 100%. And a lot of, I've got an example of one of my pet peeve values. And it is more about what you don't do. Unfortunately, people get caught up with the cons. They want to find the solution that has the most pros. Now, obviously, but that also assumes that there's also cons. And the one that feels good is do nothing, because that's easier. But the cons list of that is just so large, even larger, in my opinion, than potentially firing someone unlawfully. Let's say you fire someone, you get sued for unfair dismissal. Honestly, I would take that and set a freaking lesson. But that's me. Then do nothing and then deal with the consequences for the rest of the team. You could be dealing with a mass exodus if you do that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you dismiss one, take massive action on the other side of the spectrum, then you've got a different problem, and there are problems in between. That's the nature of leadership.
And that is, Daniel Goleman's work in leadership and leadership excellence. There are 4 categories that he puts it down to that all leaders must have. And one of those is courage and the ability to take risks. And if you don't have that there as part of your attributes, skills, and traits, you don't fall into that leadership excellence category. You have to be able to take risks. And I guess that's why leaders continue to lead, because they do the 1% of things that the 99% of the rest of the population don't want to do.
I'll tell you what, probably asking someone to leave the company has to be one of the hardest things to do. And in a situation like that, if you're in the moment and you're feeling it, you are seriously at risk. And that's the hardest part. Like if you have to have that conversation, it's almost like you have to be robot-like, and you need to park everything you feel so that you can maintain that courage.
Yeah. You
Uh,
have to be robot-like, but your number one priority falls back to emotion, which is what you said at the very beginning. The reason why we're robot-like is because people's emotions and feelings are the consequence of acting or not acting. So it may seem ruthless and heartless, but at the end of the day, half the decisions that you make as a great leader is to protect the emotions of your team. So it is hard.
100%.
Yeah.
So, you know what's interesting? You mentioned that the emotions of the team, right? Like we recently had to shake up the way that we carry out team meetings. We actually split one big team meeting into 3. Now, if you run a team meeting with 20 people, all at different levels, then you're actually needing to communicate to 20 different emotions all at the same time, which means if I want to say one thing, I need to say it in like probably 5 different ways. So if I want to say something in 30 seconds, it takes me about 3 or 4 minutes.
Yep.
Because I need to repeat it in a way which keeps everyone calm, supported, and focused and moving in the right direction. But if I rush over it, then probably 3/4 will miss what I said, or it'll strike them in a way which I said it in a nonchalant way, or I didn't give it enough. Yeah. So
Fascinatingly, there's a new term attached to that. When we talk about leadership studies, it's actually called holistic leadership, and it's only been referred to over the last 4 years. And they're leaders that are happy to communicate the same thing in different ways to suit their followers and the readiness of those followers.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Some things just happen intuitively, right? But I didn't know that, and that's really good to know. But that's
Holistic leader, Nick Pappas.
Hello. But it's more like when you're watching people's faces and their eyes, and they're looking at you, and you can see that they're trying to understand. And you know these looks because the patients give you these looks, and like you can see each of these looks one at a time, and you can see the glossing over look, you can see the intrigued look, you can see the eyebrow thing, and these facial expressions are worldwide. Like there's no confusing what facial expressions mean. So if you're not reading the room, and this is where Zoom is also quite good, actually, for me. Can't get body language as much, but you can see their face.
Yep.
So that's really helpful to know who's on board, who's not on board, who's halfway.
Yeah. Well, great segue. Sorry if that was my fault.
Let's head back in. So that's what is culture. That's slide 1, Jade. How many more segues do you reckon?
Keep them
Let's see. So this is what I was talking about before, like, great culture. I mean, is it just us having fun, like me and my team, and them interacting with each other and stuff? And, we do muck around, like bloody oath. Some of our team members want to be inside the team just because they can be themselves. Some others want to do it because there's heaps of learning and education at Balance All Performance, and lots of career progression and opportunities in the future, a growing company. So, but is this really great culture? I suppose it really comes down to what people think great culture is. So I want to talk about that. Collective programming of the mind serves the purpose of the business and is aligned with the direction of the company. Guys, you can't have a culture that is different to what you're trying to achieve. If you've got a culture that is really like focused on performance and seeing lots and lots and lots of patients. I know, Jade, you put up a poll in your group recently about how many patients people see, where there was a vast difference in numbers there. And if you've got a company that is fixed on seeing 80 to 100 patients a week, firstly, I don't think they had time to even vote on your poll. Secondly, what's the culture? What are the different types of things they do in order to encourage and reward that? Now, they might do nothing So they might be very sterile and clinical. You rock up, you open your door, you treat your patients, and then you go home, and the whole day is a bit of a transaction. That is also a culture. So there's no such thing as no culture. There's a culture that comes with everything. And that culture could be very individualistic. Like you come in, you do your thing, and then you piss off home and you don't bother anyone. It could be very political in that everyone's trying to stab each other's backs, or everyone's trying to be manipulative and a little bit Machiavellian in trying to trot over each other to get to the top. It could be that it's very collective and it's very flat structured, and it's those situations that we see lots of picnics and kumbayas and fun, right? And fun. And then there's everything in between. Now, if you consider that there's everything in between, like, I mean, if you stuff up at Deloitte, then you're probably going to get fired. If you stuff up at a small private accounting company, you're probably not. And there's probably a big difference between the culture between a very small corner store accounting culture versus Deloitte. And one of my mates is a good friend of mine. He works at Deloitte. He freaking hates it. And that's, I'll tell you, because his mindset and his values and where he wants to belong is the small culture. He wants to have a small team, one that feels like a family, one that feels like you know everyone and you can go for a beer after work, but then at that point you then go home to your families. Deloitte wants to keep you there all night, all day, and that has its own culture and its own feeling. But if fun is in line with your business goals, i.e. you want to set up a company where everyone looks forward to coming to work, then you might want to throw some fun in there. If you want an environment where people want to feel safe, then they're more likely to have fun. But at the same time, it's kind of like, well, what does safe sound like or look like? Well, does safety mean that people are likely to get performance managed? Like, I'd say that management is the opposite to feeling safe. You're kind of like, shit, I'm on fire. They've got the blowtorch on me. I don't feel safe. I feel threatened. And you're less likely to have fun. And in that sense, you're trying to force an outcome, and that could be performance. But in the meantime, they're probably not looking forward to coming to work. And that's the culture. And this is where people need to really understand, well, what is your business goal? There is no such thing as winning the NBA, and you can't be the Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan and think you're going to have fun every week, every day, and win the NBA and be the most prolific basketballer in the history of mankind that we know of, who's retired, right? It's kind of like, well, they didn't get there by having fun. They got there by cracking the whip and not looking forward to it sometimes, and then having fun along the way sometimes. So how do you bake that in? How do you do it? Well, it depends on what your goal is as a business. What do you reckon, Jade?
Yeah, I think for us and for me, and we talk about it a lot, people need to understand where their own personal values and their guiding principles sit, and that has to align with that of the business. And if it doesn't, cracks are going to start to appear, because they're either going to blame the company for the reason why they don't have the job satisfaction, or alternatively, the company is going to blame the employee for not aligning with a position that they actually don't fall into. So I couldn't agree with you more. But often, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, people don't think about their core values and their guiding principles enough. I think they often think in healthcare, well, my values are to help people. But it's so much more than that. I guess when you break it down and when you peel back the layers of the onion, it comes from environmental factors, internal and external. There's so much that has happened to us throughout our lives, how much we're taught, behaviors that we mirror and learn from other people that make up who we are. You can't fit a square peg in a round hole, I guess, would be my perspective on that. Yeah.
100%. And this is where a great interview question that I used to ask a lot is, why do you do what you do? Like, why do you want to be a chiropractor, physio, osteo, Reiki, healer? Let's go a full alternative. Like, what is it that makes you want to do what you do? And more often than not, they say, I just love helping people. But I've actually stopped asking that question, because helping people is the superficial. I don't mind Freud's classification of ego, superego, and id, although that's debunked, or that doesn't make any sense anymore. The thing that's underneath, that's the ego saying that I want to help people. Why? Because what? It makes you feel conscientious and makes you feel like self-righteous or whatever. Could be, and that's okay. It could be your conscientious trait. But what's behind that? And what's behind that? And what I found, Jade, is that people don't know what's behind that. People don't know what's behind that, and that's okay. That's okay, because although it's a good starting point, it does require a fair bit of personal development for people to be vulnerable enough to look within and have a conversation with their own thoughts, which sounds crazy, but that's difficult to do. To have a conversation with their own thoughts about what drives their behavior, and most of the time it's irrational.
And we do spend a lot of time as professionals on professional development. We need continuing professional development as part of our registration process. But I genuinely believe that people don't spend enough time on personal development and self-reflection and self-awareness. And I think unless you do it as part of your workplace drivers, often people don't put themselves in a situation where they put their core identity and values under the microscope. We just don't do it enough. And I do think that if we did it more, we would find a generation of better practitioners and better leaders.
I'll tell you what, a couple of examples that I've seen with that, and that is, well, how do I build that muscle? How do I do that? Do you just read a book? Well, no, actually, what you do is, the practical side of this is, whenever you make a joke, whenever you change, if you're in a serious conversation, like right now, let's say, Jade, let's say I made you feel uncomfortable, or if I talked about a topic that was, showing you a mirror, things that I see as normal responses to avoiding that discomfort, taking a wise crack, having a little joke, nervous laughter, fidgeting, bit of sweat, averting gaze, all these types of things, scratching, needing to go to the toilet, like all these things, getting distracted, checking your phone, those sorts of things are signs of the discomfort that you need to face into. And that's where the personal development occurs. It's when the conversation gets uncomfortable and then you shy away from that because you're not courageous enough yet. And these are the signs of like little jokes, little laughs, and oh yeah, and like blowing things off. They're the times where you didn't face into your personal development and you stay at the level that you're at, or you're at your limit.
Nothing grows without challenge and pressure. And that's both mentally and physiologically. Even bone growth, we need osteoblastic activity and forces for bones actually to grow. So, biologically that's the case, but even mentally that's the case. Unless we're challenging ourselves, we're not getting growth, we're not getting momentum, and we're not moving forward. Yep.
Love it. So what is your culture, essentially? So are you going to create a culture of personal development, for example? I mean, if we're on that topic, in order to create an environment which is conducive for growth, it does have to have an element of trust. That doesn't necessarily mean safety. It means that they trust you along the way, and they know that their performance is being monitored, but they've got a plan and they trust you, that you trust them, and so on and so forth. But if you're currently a business owner, have you described the current culture in your organization? And most of the time, people don't know how to do that. Usually people say, if you were to, it's essentially the same process that you would take in describing what you feel right now. And you start off with the superficial ones of like angry, sad, frustrated, I feel worried, like they're outer surface feelings. But when you start thinking deeper than that, I mean, outer surface descriptions of culture could be something like fun, we're performance driven, we're what's another one, Jade? We're performance driven, we're
a family,
we're a family, we're in professional, we're well educated, we're at the top of our game. Hey?
Innovative.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's another good one. So, and especially innovative. Oh, what systems and processes do you have in place to progress your innovation? Do you have a weekly meeting about that? Who's in your innovation team? Do you have a research and development department, or do you just have good ideas? And this is where the people can't just say their culture is something without looking at the proof in the pudding. So, start off with what is your culture, and then identify what do you want as your culture. But to do that, you need to actually achieve. You actually need to know what your goal is. I know you use the BHAG, and the big, hairy, audacious goal is what that stands for. And if you don't know what your goal is, then you don't know what culture you need. And then you've got to work backwards from your BHAG. Culture is something that needs to be reviewed, just like your finances. And because your culture, every conversation that you have every day and the conversations that you don't have every day end up leading towards the culture that you're building. So it's very, very dynamic, and your culture is ever changing, the same way that your business structures are, the same way that healthcare does. It changes. So you've got to review it on a regular basis. And sometimes that means you need to ask your employees. Sometimes that means you just need to assess it with your trusted confidants. So if we look at how this kind of works, in order to create a culture, you essentially talking about the Pygmalion effect. Our actions impact others' beliefs, which then cause others' actions, which then reinforce our beliefs, which influence our actions again. So if you've got that employee that's 1 foot in, 1 foot out, for example, what behaviors do they have that impact your beliefs about them? And then if beliefs about them start to impact how you talk to them, then that's going to now reinforce it's going to cause other actions from them to us, which then reinforce what we think. It's kind of like how was it? Oh no, I was thinking of a particular classroom experiment which was done back in the 70s. I think you'd know it, Jade. And it's like,
Oh, like Pavlov's dog.
kind of. Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, with the electrical.
Oh no, not
I'm thinking about all these experiments done back. We can't do now because now there's code of ethics, so you can't do half this stuff.
Hey, the psych experiments back in the 70s were brutal. Seriously.
They taught us a lot though, didn't they? I mean, half of our learnings, experimental learnings, which I know sounds horrible, started back in the Second World War, where they could kind of just do whatever they wanted, which was horrific, and I am not condoning, but gosh, there was a lot of information that came from when science could do whatever the hell it wanted, and obviously avoided ethics, and there's good reason why that's come back in. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but yeah, I mean, there was some amazing experiments back in the 70s. I've just rattled off 2 then, and it's not the ones that you're after. So
no, I'll probably explain the one that I'm after, and it's when we had a classroom, and pretty much the teacher divided the classroom between blonde hair and brown hair. And the teacher started to treat the blonde haired with positive affirmation, with accolades, with pats on the backs, with a bit of coaching. And then the brown haired children, the teacher would negatively reinforce, would tell them rather than teach them and coach them, would also not have any warmness, be very cold. And the difference in their mark were actually substantial. And it really comes down, and that's the Pygmalion effect in action. Essentially, it's like, well, if that's how I'm being treated and that's how I want to feel, then if that's how I'm feeling, then that's how I'm going to act. And it's like it ends up being this vicious cycle, and the leader is responsible for changing that. And that's why I'm raising it. It's kind of like you not having difficult conversations with the person with 1 foot out is reinforcing what's already happening. And the longer you allow that to occur, then the worse it gets. Now, you can always say, well, I'm just going to wait for that person to leave. Wrong. People much prefer the certainty of a shit environment than the uncertainty of looking for a new job. That's fact. They will not leave even if they're unhappy. It's just that they're not going to leave. They don't want to stay, but they're not leaving. And that's just human nature. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're just not willing to face into the uncertainty of leaving. So you don't act, then nothing changes, essentially. So before I move on to values, is there anything you want to add, Jay?
No, I mean, it's good. I love taking everything back to science, and there are so many studies that have watched this. There's another study that was done only a few years ago where teachers, 5 students in a class, for example, were put a green sticker onto their card. And one group of teachers were told that these children were exceptional and very, very, very intelligent. And so they received a huge amount of extra attention. Now, there was nothing different from the class. They were just randomly selected, but these children got so much more attention support. So I think it's important to understand that our perceptions and our stereotypes and bias are also really important with this cause and effect. I think, you know, to be responsible or to have a hand in people's actions and reactions and that sort of effect of behavior, I think we need to understand again that self-awareness where our own biases come in. And a lot of the time they're very subconscious. Sometimes without knowing or not, we do favor, you know, when somebody's engaged and high performing and like a sponge, we do want to give them more attention, and we do want to seek them out and help them improve and, you know, play a little hand in somebody's excellence and, you know, contributing to that. So I think it's important that circle, which I love, that affect how our bias and how our stereotypes also play into that a little bit too.
For sure. Which then kind of like, well, then how do we behave? Like, I mean, I suppose values you could look at as biases in a way. And you know, in terms of values, like where do values sit within the culture? And I suppose we've got 3 values. We've also got 4 descriptions of what our leadership should look like, and then also 4 descriptions of what our culture should look like. And that's also dynamic. That's not firmly imprinted. That also changes. Now, should your values change? Look, they can. They shouldn't change like the wind, but essentially what drives you irrationally is very close to probably almost how you're genetically predisposed towards your personality. And they're kind of like embedded inside of you. And you've got to be very careful not to always bring your personal values into your business. You've got to make sure that the values that you're trying to get your team to buy into fit into the culture that you're trying to create, which fit into the goals of the business. You can't just come up with value. Yes, Jay?
Is that like the chicken and the egg though? I mean, surely as a business owner who, for example, starts up, and obviously there's situations where you're new into a company and the culture is existing. But if, for example, you're a business owner like yourself, you set up a clinic from scratch, are you not responsible for how the culture is molded? Obviously, we then also bring different personalities in that all contribute to the overall culture as well. As we know, we can have one toxic person that can destroy a culture overnight. I've seen it happen before. But is the business owner not responsible for determining those non-negotiables, I guess?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can't, this is where the communication of, you know, some level of objective needs to be communicated. The culture needs to be like almost like that starts to evolve. But in terms of how people behave, the values need to be very clearly stipulated. And in particular, what you should be doing. And, you know, one of our values is do the right thing. Now, doing the right thing in every situation might mean that you lose. But actually you walk away with your conscience clean, you can sleep at night, right?
That's the epitome of integrity, isn't it? Doing the right thing when no one's watching, do the right thing, even when it's hard, just do the right thing.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And this is where, well, what's not the right thing, is the right thing to give that person a discount, because then it's also the wrong thing for them to expect it next time. And is it the right thing to give people an adjustment just because they asked for it? Or is that the wrong thing because now you're destabilizing their neck or something like that? Not to mention the psychological implications, the narrative associated with it. Is it the right thing to allow the patient to accept that their pelvis is out of whack? Or is it the wrong thing to now challenge their narrative further whilst they're also in pain?
Yeah.
So what's the right thing? And I hope that stirs a few people, because to be honest, sometimes I do let patients believe that their pelvis is out of whack because they're in pain right now, and maybe I can change their narrative when they're not in pain and they trust me a little more.
I think one of the concepts I always stand by is the concept of excellence, for example, is really easy to define. But whose version of excellence is very subjective, and no one has any right to force their values on somebody else as right or the only way. We see that in religion all the time, without getting too philosophical. Does anyone have a right to say that their values are more important than somebody else's? And I guess this is where communication and education, and also those non-negotiables, conscious, tangible and untangible, that you were talking about at the very beginning, comes in.
Well, I think when it comes to, a church has, like any religion, has its own values, right? Like things that are absolutely unacceptable and things that are encouraged, and what's virtuous versus not. When it comes to communicating that inside your company, like we've got our values firmly up on the walls, like they are printed. There's no confusing what the values are. We acknowledge that behavior that's in line with our values. We talk about what the right thing to do is. It's part of our induction, like people understand. And it couldn't be any clearer with every inductee. So you're given a scenario. What's the right thing to do? What's not the right thing to do? What's making a difference? What isn't making a difference? And how would you act as a business owner? How would you not act as a business owner? Like it couldn't get any clearer for an inductee, and the communication of your values needs to be from the beginning all throughout. And this is essentially how you can start to build a case against someone that is essentially slowly not acting in line with your values, and you start to performance manage their behavior, because some people are toxic inside the business, but they're bloody good performers and you can't get rid of them. And when it's time to start looking at someone who's actually quite toxic but does all the right things on the surface, if they don't understand and haven't been educated, A, and B, haven't been performance managed on the behaviors, and to see a good change in that behavior which was recorded, then how can you ever ask someone to leave if they're toxic?
And that's the thing, by default, if you're not doing anything, you're inadvertently accepting that behavior and therefore responsible as a leader for it continuing.
Well, this is my favorite part.
I'm ready.
Because we talk about integrity, right? Now, integrity is the most often used, in my opinion, from what I've seen. Integrity, everyone bloody well has their top value as integrity. Like, before I start swearing. Now, the reason I get a little bit peeved at this is because people say it, but they don't uphold it. And you say that you've got integrity, but then you don't uphold when someone has crossed you. Like, what does integrity even mean? And this is where people say, "Oh, I've got integrity. Oh, like I'm always doing the right thing. I'm always like putting my best foot forward. I donate to charity. I do this. I do that. Blah blah blah." It's like, okay, yeah, but what about someone who didn't cash up properly last night? What about someone who booked in an extra session because they wanted to build their patient numbers a little bit more? What about you booking your patient based on how booked you are rather than what the patient needs? How is that integrity? It's not, but you let it slide because you don't have the integrity to uphold integrity.
And I think that's why I love the quote from Oprah. It's one of my favorites, is that integrity is doing the right thing even when nobody knows that you've done it or not.
Yeah, that's right. And essentially it comes down to integrity. What does it imply as a behavior? And making sure that that's known inside the company. How should people behave if they have integrity? Do all your team members have the same idea on what integrity is? And if so, are you giving them Oprah's definition, or are you giving them a definition? Because you might say, oh, it's non-specific lower back pain, but what does that mean to you and what does that mean to me? It's maybe explain what you mean, and then we'd be on the same page. So I get really like passionate about it because I'm a bit more of an upholder than what's good for me sometimes. Standing up for myself and standing up for what I believe is the right thing versus not is something that I'm truly passionate about. And it comes down to sometimes that doesn't exactly position me in the most politically positive way, but hey, like I can sleep at night. This is what the definition is, a quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. Now, if you were to put that as your definition inside your business, being honest, that's fair enough. Then if it's more honesty than it is integrity, then just why don't you put a value as honesty instead of integrity? Because the other side of it is having strong moral principles. Now, morals is definitely contentious. And you want to introduce that into your business. I mean, there's something my father taught me, and that is don't ever talk about politics, sport, or religion at work. Now, sport, I ignored that one, but like politics and religion, like, yeah, want to know where our morals come from? Like, it's kind of like, why don't you, if you're going to talk about integrity, then you might want to review which international culture every one of your staff member are coming from, and you're not allowed to do that. So I think integrity is a dangerous value to have inside your business for the simple fact that you've got to be honest about the morals. Good luck upholding that. So, yeah.
What a fascinating way of looking. I mean, if you're looking at the definition there, clearly our interpretation of integrity and the way that we culturally as a society define integrity is so subjective. But when you look at this definition, yeah, I guess it's pretty dangerous, because strong moral principles is a very contentious issue. And, there is no right or wrong. I don't think you get to determine whether your morals are more superior to somebody else. It's dangerous ground.
That's right. And like next minute you guys, in a workplace, you're arguing about climate change, and like it's just not conducive to achieving business goals. Unless your business is in climate change, then stop. Or if your business has to do with a moral, then don't have integrity as a value, because there's no way you can keep moving forward towards business objectives without tripping over yourselves and other people tripping each other over and all sorts of stuff. But that's just my opinion about integrity. I think we're in healthcare, and I think we can do better than that, though. Well, yeah, more questions about exactly like, if integrity is your value, then how are you screening for that? And does that make you a moral workplace? The other side of it, it's dangerous if you uphold it, but it's also very, very weak if you don't. And then that's where the values start to get lost in translation of like, oh yeah, our values of integrity and charity and like all these sorts of things. It's kind of like, well, yeah, but if you don't do it, then it's weak. And I think we've spoken about that ad nauseum. And this ad nauseum. Do they know what behaviors are acceptable? And specifically, do they know what's not acceptable? Do you have the difficult conversations with people if they've done something that's not okay? And half the time they don't even know that it's not okay. They're like, oh shit, I didn't realize that's what that was the interpretation. It's like, yeah, well, if I didn't tell you, then I'm just sitting with it, aren't I? So this is where people need to like really start having these conversations about, do you know that, say, hey, this is a difficult conversation. I have a small bone to pick with you. Did you know that you did this and this is how I've interpreted that? Can you please help me uncover what it was that you intended? And then realize that their behavior actually was in line. It's just you interpreted it wrong, but you didn't have the difficult conversation to identify the sentiment behind the behavior in the first place. So I want to try and encourage, and I think on that poll, Jade, you and I and a few others were the only ones that put that they only treat like 1 to 10 patients a week. Yeah, because I'm too busy having conversations with my staff about what their behavior was like and what they believe, and how that's in line with business objectives.
Yeah,
it takes time.
I think, that, as Brene Brown says, clear is kind, and radical candor, which is, being able to offer this feedback in real time, in the moment. There's a science behind tapping into that sympathetic or parasympathetic part of the brain. If you pick your moment, choose the way that you deliver that information, you can actually get a far greater outcome where people aren't resisting or having to defend their behaviors, and you can have these open, frank conversations. And most of the time, when it comes from the best place in your heart, only good can come from it. But people need to be open. We need to be aware of our perceptions, how we're carrying ourselves, and how others are seeing us. But without, exactly as you say, without these difficult conversations, sometimes by beating around the bush, you're actually creating more trouble for yourself rather than bulldozing straight through the forest. Sometimes getting straight from A to B and tearing the Band-Aid off will give you a better result. And I learned that the hard way through my experience. I suppose I gained more respect from my team when I was more direct, coupled with empathy.
Yeah. And there's a time for that. And then there's also the time for the long way. I think that's a testament to what you've created, Jade, because if you can be direct with empathy, it means there's trust. And if what I find that when there's a relationship that isn't built on trust, and you introduce conflict too early, and a difficult conversation could be interpreted as conflict, as a type of conflict. It's not necessarily an argument, it's just discomfort. And if you introduce it before there's trust, usually one of the two or both it turns into an argument. It turns into a non-productive, someone's losing, someone gets hyper emotional, they can't control themselves. And often it's because the intention isn't being repeated throughout that conversation, or there's just no trust. And so I think it's a testament to you, Jade, that you were able to incorporate the directness and it was fine. Yeah.
Thank you. I had to fail miserably for years, almost a decade. I was trying to be too kind, and I was confusing friend and friendly. I think that you can be friendly to your team, and I think you can be direct without having to take it personally. And I think that's one of most leaders' greatest slip-ups, is that they feel like for people to follow them, they need to be liked personally. And we have got that rule at the clinic: don't confuse friend with friendly. You don't have to be
that's correct
with all your team, but you can be well respected and well liked by them still, which I guess is a great lead into your last slide, and a way to wrap it up. I'd say comes down to trust. And I guess that's my question to you is, can you have trust in an organization without a good culture?
Well, I think that people need to. I think trust comes from a couple of things. The first one's, and there's a book by Stephen Covey on this. It's called The Speed of Trust, which is a combination of character and competency. They need to know you know what you're doing, and they need to know that everyone there also has their back. And if you do that consistently, so I like to add the consistently part to that bit, because I don't think Stephen Covey really covered that off well enough. It was kind of like, you've got to have the characteristics that they desire or that they feel comfortable with. They've got to know that you're in support of them and you're championing them. At the same time, they've got to know that the decisions you're making are in line, that they trust the decisions you've made, and that they back you regardless of how much they don't like it. And that trust really comes down. That's quite relational trust. I suppose when it comes to an organization, you've got to make sure that you follow through on everything that you say that you're going to do. And if you don't, that you address that, you close the loop. So I think a lot of trust comes from closing the loop, actually, where you said you're going to do something and then I haven't heard anything around that. And I've got to follow you up for you to tell me that you decided not to do it. It's like, well, where am I in this relationship? Sorry, do I look like a brick wall to you?
Mm.
And this is where the closing the loop situation starts to get a little tiring and arduous. But if you don't close the loop, then how is anyone meant to know that you're seeing things through and you're following through on everything that you said you're going to do, and you followed through on the promises that you made? And if you can't, then there's a bloody good reason for it, and that comes down to communication. So character and competence for me is probably what the leader needs to embody in order to build the trust inside the organization. But then obviously consistently, the company, the organization, and the leader needs to also have a track record.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's probably my answer to that question.
Absolutely. It's classic modeling the way and leading by example. Do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah. Basically. Well, that pretty much, that's the long and the short of it. I think I don't know how long we went for, Jay.
Amazing. No, we're pretty much right on time. Thank you for sticking with us. If you're still here at home, so many golden nuggets from Nick Papastamatis. Thank you so much for joining us. If people love this stuff, I know that you and I could talk about this all day. It's something that I can hear you are clearly passionate about, and I know firsthand. Leadership is very difficult. It takes courage. It takes bravery, and it takes challenging the status quo. And I think you are a poster child for that, Nick. And I say that in the most respectful way I can. I do admire your resilience to keep pushing and to stand by your values and also to instill them in your team. So how can we find out more about you? I know you've got an amazing podcast, The Balance Experience 2.0.
Yeah.
That's do some coaching and that sort of stuff. Where can people find you?
Look, I'm accessible. So the best way to get in contact with me is actually via Instagram. And if you just follow me on Dr. Nick Pappas, then usually I put out some content. I'm not hugely content heavy. I put out some good stuff. I think it's
funny stuff as well. I love your humor. And thank you. And if you just slide into my DMs, I'm sweet. Usually I'll accept a request. And if you're not asking stupid questions, then I shouldn't say that. Nothing's a stupid question. But if you're being respectful, then I'll happily answer. Especially respectful of time. That's a big one for me. So my phone goes pretty hard. So if you want to connect with me, I'm happy to connect with you. I'll usually swing you a voice message in return, but as long as you're respectful, that it might take me a day or two. Amazing. And that's one of the privileges that we have with the GRx Leader Network. A lot of it are really generous with their time, and I am hoping that you're going to do an encore and come back to the Business Summit this year as a mentor again, because you were very popular. But yes, look, definitely connect with Nick, hear more from him, check out his podcast, his team cameo in that as well. They are hilariously funny and very informative. So make sure you check out them. And thank you so much, Nick, for all the effort you put into those slides, your contribution, your passion, and your continual investment into the allied health profession to make it what it is today. Thanks so much, Nick.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.